The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name's Jeff Cook. I'm a longtime philosopher at UNC in Greeley, Colorado. With me is TJ Wilson, coffee guru, lover of theology, and Enneagram ninja.
Hello.
My man.
Hey.
Hey, we have a new friend today.
Yes. I love new friends.
Mandy Capehart does really impressive work, and I've longed to bring her on. We had the excuse this week to send out an invitation and decided to release this early because for a lot of us, it's kind of the season. And maybe it's just me. I had like 4 things break recently. And so what I really want is free therapy. And so, Mandy, welcome.
Oh, Jeff, I understand that and relate wholeheartedly. Thank you guys and TJ for having me today. I'm excited to connect finally.
Yeah, us too.
This is our first version of Around the Circle Live. These are going to be more open conversations with folks that we love, respect, and admire. I have a handful of things I just want to bring up about like things going on personally and in the world, but I have always wanted to start off a podcast with just an open-ended, hey, what Enneagram person, what are you learning about the Enneagram recently?
Oh, okay. Yeah, humility. And as an 8, humility is my best friend when I am willing and open to it. I think that allowing the wisdom that I have, that embodied wisdom, that intuition that I love to lean upon, so a chance to access humility and figure out like, no, not only are you not the only person. I have always said, hey, I'm not a guru. I'm hardly an expert. And yet I have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, intelligence, right, around that. And so there's a sticking point where humility becomes very helpful whenever I am in a situation where I'm leading or teaching or coaching or supporting someone through anything. My awareness of my Enneagram type has let me take the back seat and let me really decide I get to be a witness here. I get to be a supporter. I'm a social 8, so I look a little different than 8s as well. And it honestly, that's why I had a hard time finding where I fell in the Enneagram. But when I did, it made so much sense in how that I show up with people in individual relationships and in professional relationships. So I would say even right now, it's always the thing when you say, oh, I'm learning about patience, I'm learning about humility, that it starts to crash down. So even now I'm okay, notice today if there are more opportunities for humility practice.
That's lovely. You and I feel similar on the front that I am pushing in my vocation into a place where I'm trying to elevate my repressed center. I'm trying to get my thinking up by studying philosophy. I don't know if this is the same, but you are an 8, so you're feeling repressed. And it sounds like a lot of your work centers on elevating that part of yourself. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I think one thing that's really wonderful about that intentional language around repressed centers is that when it comes to grief work, my approach is very holistic, heart, mind, body, spirit. So all of it's in there. And knowing that we have access to all those parts in ourselves anyway, the Enneagram really frames the language to make it a little softer for people who feel like, hey, you're an 8, you don't have any emotions, your emotion is anger. Well, no, my secondary response is anger. My first response is something much softer, and anger is an incredible protector. It is full of wisdom that says, in this moment, there is injustice and something is wrong. No wonder I'm angry. But can I soften and get down to the emotions underneath it? And in my work, I do distinguish between feelings and sensations, feelings being the language people use primarily for our emotions, and sensations being something we experience in our body where emotions begin. So when I can embody that gut intuition and that physical wisdom that I carry, the language around the emotions I'm experiencing becomes much clearer. And that in itself gives me permission to say, okay, now what? Thank you, anger, for the waving flag. Thank you for the awareness. Thank you for the willingness to let me get there and probably create some space so that everyone's not crowding me. They're freaked out by my anger. Fine, I'm not. It is always a friend now. So I see that as an opportunity to then say, okay, we've got some big feels. Let's have them, because they're just information. And if we don't engage that emotional state that we're in, that energy remains in the body and becomes stagnation, becomes illness, becomes pain, confusion. I would rather metabolize it now and gain something from it in the moment than 10 years later say like, oh, I realized I was always angry in this situation. I mean, that's what therapy is for, which is great. But at the same time, if I can process my losses and my trauma and my pain now, I am a more embodied person for tomorrow, which ultimately leads to a better awareness of what I'm carrying.
Yeah, that's huge.
First, I want to thank you for giving me language for feelings versus sensations.
Oh, sure.
I feel like I've been looking for that word for months, if not years. So thanks for that. I'm stealing it.
Have it.
Also, I am really curious which came first, your own inner work or your desire to help other people use that space?
Yeah, my own inner work. I don't remember a year in life that we haven't had some kind of grief event, whether it was divorce, moves, deaths, so many different betrayals, all of the different levels of disenfranchised grief, or that's what we call grief that's not associated with death, things that just show up that we aren't necessarily validating in the lives of other people. So as a young person, my access to emotional intelligence started young. I had emotionally intelligent people all around me, also grieving, also causing grief events. Like they weren't, no one was perfect. But as I got into high school and continued losing friends and classmates and family members, I realized like, okay, this isn't working. Just pretending everything is fine. College, the same kind of things started. I needed some awareness, and I was involved in a evangelical outreach group on campus when I was young. And even then I was just like, there is so much here that people are grieving, and we're trying to just, now I have the language for spiritual bypassing. We're trying to just bypass it. And I don't agree with that. I don't think that actually causes health. So as I got much older and went through into my 20s and 30s, I was doing my own grief work in different language. And then I lost my great-grandmother, my grandfather, and then my mom. And I realized this has to get real serious real quick or we're done. This can't just be casual anymore. Did my own work, started studying. And then in 2020, decided to write the book because of COVID and my own losses that happened early in that year. And I just recognized I can't live in a world where this much untended grief exists on a generational scale. Like this is not going anywhere. This is impacting literally everyone on the planet. And I don't want to be a part of a continued bypassing of what is real. And so I wrote the book as a testament of things that I used that helped me process. I also really just wanted to try it out and see like, does this mean anything to anyone? And unfortunately, there was a wildfire a couple months after I finished the transcript for the book in our town, and a handful of my friends and family like lost their homes as well. So we just formed this little online group saying like, let's see if this is practical and applicable to anyone in a coaching setting. And fortunately it became an incredibly rich space for people to say, oh, I can do this outside of a faith practice. I had no idea. And at that time I was so entrenched is not the word, but just so wrapped in evangelical culture that everyone I knew was looking for a scripture to assuage their pain. And I was over here saying like, it won't work long term. That works for the short term. And then in 3 months when you're like, well, I said the prayer, I did the study, why am I still grieving? That is when you're going to recognize there's so much more to life than simply the spirit. It is a holistic approach. And it was my work as a young person, not like aware that I was doing the work, but it was noticing as I got older what things were really happening within me. And it really formed this beautiful approach that, no, you can't just throw a scripture at yourself and think that'll be fine because God is all powerful. It's just not how it works when it comes to grief. So, yeah.
Love the idea of holistic approaches to grief, which I likewise hadn't thought of, that there is a mental component there's an emotional component. I feel a lot of grief, body type that I am, in my physicality. And I imagine addressing each of those is going to be quite different, correct?
It is. There are some places where things will overlap. And indeed, when I went through my book, it's a 31-day guidebook. And so I wanted everything to be really tight and approachable, not long drawn out chapters, but very short. Okay, I can't really comprehend much, so I can get into this. And I would go through each exercise that I brought to the book and think, what does this address? Does this address more than one area? And which areas of our whole person is addressed in this practice? And in some instances, there are pieces that are mind, heart, and spirit. Some are body and heart. Some are very like the sensations versus feelings, finding the language and being able to distinguish what it is we're experiencing, because we really think that, and this is, cognitive behavioral therapy does this to us. It's the change your mindset, change your life mentality, which is really difficult when there's trauma and loss involved. So there's also the Buddhist principle, suffering is attachment. It is your thoughts. It is your belief of attachment that causes suffering. So yes, and when we are ruminating or dealing with the energy of loss in our bodies and our thoughts are stuck on it, that is not a negative thing. It's not something we just have to squash back. It's something we have to sit with. That is an energy within us that wants attention, that needs to be moved through. So things can be cyclical, but how do we then intervene with awareness instead of a need for control? How do we show up in our stories and say, what has been taken from me at the basis level is certainty, that I can control, this idea that I can control anything really that's going to happen to my life. The reality is I want to cultivate a space where I can say, okay, I don't control. I can manage my thoughts, but I really can't control them. I can manage my emotions, but I really can't control them. I can learn about them. I can learn how to manage and metabolize them. Same with our body. I can't control what happens to my body, but I can manage and influence a lot of the things. And when we're grieving, it feels like mud and it's too difficult to sort through. So being able to find the language for it allows us to then say, well, what would change for me if I introduced a physical practice of yoga or walking? And in my practice, I'm like, walking is one of the best things you can do for grief, because that's bilateral stimulation of your body and you don't have to make direct eye contact. So the intensity of whomever you're walking with, that relationship, you can talk without feeling like, oh, they're peering into my soul and this will be a story that haunts me forever.
The idea of control, it seems so often that when we exert real effort to try and control one thing, so like in the grief process, it's like, I don't want to cry. It's at the expense of something else.
Yeah.
Like when we are trying to control the particular center that we are experiencing no control in, then we're sacrificing another center.
Yep.
To do that.
You are. I think of it as like trying to grab a goldfish in water, but with your bare hand. And I imagine it sounds a little funny with an 8 saying like, hey, let go of control. You don't have any anyway. But it's this, we all think we have the skill set to navigate anything. We all believe in ourselves, which is great. I say that so broadly. A lot of people obviously are dealing with, myself included, self-confidence in all kinds of areas. But this idea that if we are told, grab the goldfish, sure, I can do that, no big deal. It's not until we're in the middle of it, we're like, dear God, why? Why are we trying to grab this goldfish? That's a wonderful question. What a wonderful question. Why are you trying to grab the goldfish?
Yeah. With your hand. Even.
With your hand.
Come on.
Brute strength. I mean, really, we're going to brute strength our way through whatever we're facing as if it's inherent in us to just survive and overcome.
Right.
When thinking about grief itself, perhaps taking a step back, what is grief? What comes to your mind, Mandy?
It's a totally normal human experience. It's a part of being a sentient being. We've decided that grief is an enemy in our culture, particularly in Western culture. And from my framework, right, as a former evangelical, having a lot of experience in circles that really just wanted to focus on hope, love, and the future. Well, as a future-oriented type, I can promise I'm always thinking about the future. And when grief enters the conversation, the uncertainty, that lack of control, it's 5,000 goldfish swimming around my head. Grief is such a dysregulating experience for our nervous systems that are looking for safety, security, and belonging in every setting, right? We're always looking for, can I survive if I'm in this place? Can I trust this place that I'm in to stay safe long term? And do I belong? Not can I fit in? Am I allowed to be fully me, flaws included, failures included, without apology? So when it comes to trying to figure out what grief looks like, we need an environment that allows for those things to be flourishing, to be discovered, to be uncovered within ourselves before it's ever an external experience, right? If we don't have safety, security, and belonging with us, how are we supposed to recognize it around us? But unfortunately, because grief is minimized in all settings, especially at a national level, bereavement isn't protected, and it's 3 days and then get back to productivity, right? The
Right.
capitalist nature of our nation really diminishes the fact that grief is ongoing, that it deserves to be honored. In the same way we would walk into the office euphoric after the best first date of our lives, if we walk into the office devastated over the worst loss we've ever never expected to encounter, why would we be expected to be quiet about it, right? We are humans that show up, and these things within us, again, if we don't explore and express them, they will remain, and they do cause physical ailment later in life. So that's such a long definition of what grief is, but really grief is just the other side of the coin of love. It is that expression that we have that just needs somewhere to go.
Putting your thumb on the fact that grief is about your care and love for something, I think a fantastic first step.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to bring in a quote from the great philosopher Vision. What is grief if not love persevering?
Right. Yeah. When that
There's
came out,
this moment of time in a show that just the MCU almost doesn't deserve to have something that profound, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just
it's so funny.
good.
I will say I didn't watch one. I don't watch anything or do anything right away when it comes out because I'm in control of myself and I don't want to, no one's the boss of me. The number of phone calls I got about WandaVision, and my husband is a huge comic book fan. And even he was watching, he's like, how are you not watching this? I'm like, buddy, I can't capitulate. I can't give in to the demands of other people. It's not oppositional defiance disorder, but it is not far from it. When I finally watched it, going beyond the clever storytelling that was a little confusing, right? I found myself like, oh no, I'm going to have to write my way through defending Wanda because she's a griever. Yes, she's a villain. Yes, she went the wrong.
No.
But since day one, she has been set up to fail by, oh no. And not fights. They're not fights. They're not confrontation. It's not conflict, but the discussions that I got into about that show, because I won't let people be black and white. You have gray space. Grief is the epitome of the definition of gray space. And if you're going to come to me and say, she's a villain, point blank, period. So anyway, all that to say, I waited on WandaVision because I knew everyone was real passionate right away.
Sure.
And I needed to be able to get to a dispassionate place so that I could not ruin all my friendships.
I love it.
One of the things, as you're speaking, one of the big ideas that's washing over me is just how grief is one of the few emotions that we have that doesn't seem to be located in time. It ends up being very much about our past. It's something that we feel in the present, but for many of us, grief is about the future and what we're losing as well as what has been lost.
Yep.
I really want to turn to grief that's not necessarily about the death of loved ones. And as I move into that space of thinking about what has been lost, that's kind of what comes to my mind. It's like we experience grief, do we not, in terms of we've relocated to a new city. That's about what we've lost in the past. It's also like we're not going to be there in the future, or we've lost a job, or we've retired, or we have had a divorce or a separation. I imagine that infertility would probably have some of this. We could probably go, over and over. Empty nest syndrome, your kids leave, and what have you lost there?
Did you mention elections not going the way that we want them.
I've heard that was a thing recently. Or people spoiling the penguin online. This is grief.
You got to get off Twitter. That's on you, man.
For a large number of our audience, we're grieving the future in terms of elections.
Yeah.
And then there's the grief, I suppose, of our bodies shutting down over time. TJ and I both are experiencing recently. So the signs of elderliness and all the things. Apparently grief can be in many locations.
Yeah.
That's a huge setup, but what are your thoughts, Mandy?
Grief is ubiquitous. I actually got into a debate with someone the other day because I feel that everyone is grieving, whether they're cognizant of it or not, whether they're choosing it or not. And the pushback was, I know people who haven't lost anyone into their 50s, and I didn't want to go too far into it. It was another podcast conversation, and we didn't have the time for me to point out every area of transition can contain grief. So whether we are facing down a diagnosis, this is one you didn't mention, but I want to touch on that too.
Yeah.
This is a remembrance of who we were and what we believed would be true for us when we were little, shifting into the present moment where now there is a lot of uncertainty about what comes next. And I have to wrestle with, I don't know now if my future plans are possible. My personal story involves a lot of infertility and miscarriages. The anticipation, the conversations now with our child about why she's an only child. These are all layered with our different expressions and experiences of grief. And as we get older through these different losses and transitions, who we are shows up differently as well. That's one of the first secondary losses that I point out to someone when they are coming to me with a grief event that they want to work through, is that secondary loss, the losses that come after you have the initial loss that you didn't see coming necessarily. So if you're going through a divorce, maybe the secondary losses are, oh God, I lost that friend group. I don't get to go to that place anymore. That's his restaurant. He keeps telling me don't go there, right? Like little pieces that don't seem like a big deal, and in some instances may roll off of us. But in others, they can be very tangible and very impactful. That alone is one of the areas where Enneagram work really helps with grief, being able to say, hey, within the type that you really lead with, this is your stance in relationship to time, which is all made up, and we're all just doing our best and everything's an imagination. So dream big. But what do you want to do now with this information? If you know, when I realized I was future oriented, my whole world made sense. I was like, I'm constantly pushing for more. So really a mindfulness practice is what has served me really well, and other people I know who are very future oriented, being able to really emphasize what does a thought mindfulness practice look like for us? How does that affect our grief work? Because it can eliminate the anxiety around all of these things that we're experiencing and trying to control and trying to avoid around additional future losses. Time is chaotic when we're grieving.
I'm very thankful that you brought up Enneagram. This is apparently an Enneagram podcast. We should probably add that. One of the things that's hit me is that we have a relationship to grief, and it's probably coming out of our stance. And your language concerning your own approach towards grief feels very assertive. You're gonna take it, grab it. We're doing something with it, as opposed to, I imagine both TJ and I are very different on these fronts. Yeah. In terms of our relationship to the grief itself, I'm very responsive to it. I tend to, as was kind of mentioned earlier, I'm very much a person who's, I'm going to try and deal with it as quickly as possible when it arises so that it can be set aside, because I want to have a different focus and posture. My assumption with TJ is that it's more of a warm bath to kind of sink into at times and then move out of. But that would just be an assumption.
Yeah, it's pretty close. And with the specific added piece that, like, there are things that I know I need to feel that I'm going to do later.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I love that. So, I have a friend who's a 9 that I work with, and she will say very clearly about how her 9-ness shows up in her grief. She's like, so anyway, I looked right at it and I thought, eventually.
Yep. Yeah. one of my favorite TV shows is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and in the 5th season, her mom dies. Sorry, spoiler alert for a show from 20 years ago. And the episode of her death is phenomenal television, and it is so incredibly impactful. It's so well done. It's beautiful. It's so moving. And like for years before my mom died, this episode would make me cry about my mom's death. And now I have had it in my queue. Like I'm 2 or 3 episodes away from it, and I have been for like 4 years.
Yeah, that intense avoidance. So here's the thing I want to touch on about comfort shows and things like familiarity when we're grieving. It's predictable. We know what's coming. So we can control. There are no surprises. Again, we've got the goldfish well in hand and things will be just fine. For you to have that awareness and also recognize, I know the intensity attached to that. And I know my nervous system, whether you cognitively know this or not, cannot tolerate that level of dysregulation right now, because my ability to tolerate and stay with myself in that dysregulation is less right now than it was once upon a time before it became really real for me. I think that's why we are so quick to bypass others in their grief when we are not necessarily trying to cause any harm, but we just don't recognize that someone's ability to stay in their grief and to tolerate that dysregulation, that is a gift we need to sit at the feet of and learn from, right? That is something that is so precious and it will affect us. We will need that someday, but getting there is a hard thing to do. I would avoid.
And all of us come at it from very different places. Like the ability to recognize it and like know that I need to wait for the right space for this is really good. Yeah. But it often prevents me from getting good work done.
Yeah, it holds you back from this awareness. Like you could, like I said, yes, but later. Later doesn't often come because all the other things show up and say like, well, also we could instead do, this video game.
Yep.
Or this pizza date with friends, or read this, comic
Just
book.
kick that emotional can down the road.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to circle back to Enneagram for 2 seconds here. For many of us, when we have friends who are in mourning, we come with, well, this is what I want. If I was in your shoes, this is the sort of thing that I would want. I would want somebody to leave me alone. I would want somebody to push me forward, etc. And obviously Enneagram's all over that. And so as I'm thinking through this, I'm like, this is a super complicated soup of mess right here for not only the person grieving, but for the person who perhaps loves the person who's grieving. I imagine you have the very clear, straightforward, here's the easy answer for that person. We're all coming from different places. What's the wisdom there?
What you're describing is centering. This idea that I've been there, it's embodied in the language, I know how you feel. You do not know how I feel because you have not asked any questions about how I feel. And even if you did ask the question, maybe you weren't listening. You were prepared to say, oh, okay, cool. Here's the book that I felt good about. Here's the person I've worked with. Here's the scripture that encouraged me. Here's the show that brought me catharsis. Centering is a form of avoidance. It's like a distress tolerance, the opposite of distress tolerance, right? I'm sitting with someone who's grieving, and when I am in an average space for myself or even a stressed space, or I just don't recognize what grief looks like, I tend to try and relate in the most beautiful of ways. And I have ADHD, so I hyper tend to relate through story and try and like, you're okay, I'm just as chaotic. And the problem being like that lack of self-awareness that they're opening up, they're putting a bid for connection into the world, and I am slapping it down by saying, but what about me and my thoughts on this? The way that Enneagram work can really help us decenter is it allows us to like take a step back and observe ourselves with that self-compassion, that observational, non-judgmental approach, so that we're looking at ourselves not as an archetype, but as a very curious project, almost like a science project. I'm very science minded. So I look at myself and I think that's really interesting. Where's the thread? Where did that come from? And when it comes to showing up for someone else, my opportunity is then to play social scientist and say, that's so fascinating. How did you get there? You were experiencing loss. What is it like for you? And a background in anthropology and journalism led me there to say, I've always wanted to ask people their stories and hear where they're coming from. Enneagram language has then allowed me to stop talking after I say, tell me more. And it has allowed me to listen and allowed me to get into a space where I can validate their story and their experience of it and say, oh, I've never heard it expressed that way. Or that sounds really similar. I've heard similar things. What are your experiences? Do you feel isolated in this? What do you know about who you are and how that might affect the way you show up? And of course, this is kind of more like coaching questions that I would get into with people. But as just a friend, a layperson sitting with someone else, being able to quietly hold space with them means learning to tolerate the distress and the discomfort of grief in my own life. It's not contagious. I'm not going to catch it. Will I be activated in my losses? Maybe. It's entirely possible. But if I am courageous enough to not try and insulate myself everywhere I go from my own humanity, I will be able to sit with them in a way that releases a richer experience of humanity and attunement between us. That is what friendship is meant for. That is where those lifelong foundations are laid, in the moments when we see ourselves as vulnerable and exposed, and we say, not just me too, but I see you and I want to know more.
I think that also it gives us a great opportunity to broaden our perspectives on both sides of the conversation, because there's a good chance that the other person is seeing something from a different center.
1,000%.
Right?
Yep.
We all are going to experience grief the way that we experience the rest of the world, and through our own intelligence centers. When someone next to us is having grief, their intelligence center may be different, and we need to, as people who want to help those in grief, we need to learn that their experience is different and we can't solve it. And it gives us an opportunity to listen, to get a, like I said, broader perspective. And from the other side, it also helps, like, my own experience of having someone else look at my grief and see it from a different angle. It gives me a better perspective on it as well.
This is why I love when I can use Enneagram language in grief sessions or in group sessions, because I used to describe the Enneagram framework to people who were very skeptical, or like, this is just another Myers-Briggs, when I was first learning about it, by saying, well, actually, if you invited one of all 9 types to go take a hike with you to the top of a mountain, and all of them said yes, there would be a different reason why they said yes. One knows the map, one knows the shortcuts, one packed the snacks, one can't wait. They're just so excited to be included. One can't wait to bring out all of the first aid supplies that they've packed. You know, everybody's got like a base motivation of why they're like thrilled to be included. And when it comes to the grief lens, we can say everyone is grieving, and what we learn from them about how it shows up in their life through their unique lenses, through the way what their gender is, what their location is, what their ethnicity is, what their family structure is like, that is going to shift. It's like one extra facet on a prism where the light shines through and it looks just a little bit different than mine. If we are really, truly willing to understand what grief is, do the work to become more expansive people and create space for ourselves, even selfishly, we need language like the Enneagram provides so that we can embrace that difference, embrace what might be true. And that also allows us to eliminate so many things. I have a group of friends that I was with, and we were all at Powell's bookstore in Portland, Oregon. And I bought Beatrice Chestnut's book on the Enneagram, and we were walking out, and I didn't realize the types of who I was with, and they were almost all 7s. And I laughed and thought, like, no wonder I'm having the best time of my life, because I have a 7 wing and I'm constantly like, this is great. And then I looked at him, I'm like, this also explains why every one of you has kind of avoided my intense questions this weekend. Okay, noted. I will nail it down. I will find a way in, because I want that rich relationship with people. I want the depth, and I want the vulnerability, and I want to embody that vulnerability begets strength, because strength can't be anything without vulnerability. And so being able to talk about my process frees others to talk about theirs. And that is what makes us, I mean, my God, that's the basis of all relationship. And if we just pretend that everything is fine all the time, we're literally all lying.
Yeah.
There's no trust.
I had a great question for you, and then you sidetracked me, because that was a perfect little illustration of how the thing that you as an 8 will avoid most will be your vulnerability and just your acceptance of that, pushing into that. This is actually where a lot of life is for you. Yeah. Each of the types will be different on these fronts.
Yeah.
And grief can open up that door. I suppose on the positive side, here's a positive side for grief to open up some doors for folks. But then there will be those who push too far into grief.
I want to put a little like asterisk at the top of it, because bless their hearts, I love 4s, but the number of 4s who've told me they are inherently grief experts because they are 4s just teaches me that they're in an average space and don't necessarily understand the difference between grief and melancholy. They are very different things. Can grief have melancholy? Yes. Does melancholy have grief? Yes. They are different words for a reason. Anyway, what I have found to be, again, another benefit of Enneagram is we can use the language of that average space, below average or above average, to kind of quantify, assign a value, if that's what you want to do, to the experience we're working through in our life, and that just general assessment of our state and naming the states that we're in. I do a lot of work with Enneagram aligned with nervous system language. And so when we are in a dysregulated state, how are we responding to the world around us? How are we making sense of the world around us? When we continue again to repress those states, to repress our experiences, to rely on coping mechanisms, and I want to come back to that, or to just pretend that we're okay, or, read a book, or when my mom first died, I just pretended to read a lot. I just held a book. I couldn't hold a thought, but I could hold the book and people would leave me alone. We are in a state that makes us feel like everything's going to be okay if I can just survive this, right? That survival mode, it becomes a learned behavior that we stick with. This is where coping mechanisms get really dysfunctional. This is a lot of times people will come to me years into their grief and say, I just want to learn some better coping mechanisms. And my response is, how about we get rid of every coping mechanism? Not everyone, but what would it look like for you if we actually stopped trying to cope and began processing instead? Again, going back to that idea of, as we metabolize things through our lives, that energy dissipates from our bodies. It's not destroyed. It's out there in the world. Energy and matter aren't destroyed, but they do remove themselves from our physical bodies. So we don't have to be the ones carrying the literal weight and burden of this heavy energy that draws all of our life focus and all of our attention toward it. So that stuckness that we feel, I love the word stagnation, because it again harkens back to this idea of movement and energy, really being able to have momentum. When we start to move towards ourselves, we gain momentum, and we gain this reminder that this is actually a good thing. I've gotten to the point where I am just normalizing tears as often as possible.
Well, I was thinking like another way to think about it is like, if I went to the gym with my friend Jeff for the first time, we might not be friends after that trip. But if I kept going with him, I would learn how to exercise regularly, where I push myself physically in those ways. Like, I can do 7 push-ups, but if I do 7 push-ups every day for the rest of my life, eventually I will be able to do more.
Yeah.
And it's the same idea. Like, we're practicing things that we don't know how to do because we haven't done it before.
Yep.
and it just happening in our mind, in our brain, in the ways that holistic body, brain, heart, like all of this stuff is working in concert together all the time, always. And sometimes we have to learn how to think differently.
100%.
Practice it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said that because, and I'm not going to introduce any other big words. No more $5 words. Our brains get in the way. This is why I love my work as a body-based practitioner and grief coach. Is my brain will tell me and have very valid, intelligent arguments as to why a thing is not right, why it's not going to work, why it won't last, why it's not, because it won't last is not worth my time. And when we can decide, again, to just, okay, I can do this thing for 5 seconds. I can do this hard thing for 10 seconds. I can do this hard thing for 10 minutes. We give ourselves far less credit than we are owed when it comes to those cognitive arguments against the thing, right? There's pride here. This is why, again, humility is my friend right now and has been for so long. I don't want to go into an environment and say, like, I'm the smartest person in this room. I will immediately leave that room unless I'm in charge of small children, in which case I will stay put. But if I feel like I'm ever the smartest person in the room, I'm out. I don't want to be the one on the stage, the platform, the expectation that the pressure is on me to lead the group. Not because I can't do it, I definitely can, but because I want to go into an environment where it's collaborative and where I get to learn from other people while I am sharing my life experience, right? We are all in relationship inside of ourselves, heart, mind, body, spirit, and in relationship to other people. And if we can attune to them, if we can notice what they're going through and meet them where they're at, then they are going to feel more encouraged and inspired to meet us, notice where we are and meet us where we are at. So that becomes a healthy relationship where we can move toward what is uncomfortable for a little bit and then move away from it and back into what feels like safety and give ourselves permission to be, I don't know, nuanced, holistic, real people who have big problems and big successes and are not ever going to be perfect. Super sorry to everybody who's a one that just heard me say that. I will say it again louder.
We talked about things that we avoid earlier, being embracing them being a sign of health, and so you're just inviting the ones among us into spaces of health.
Always.
There's one last element to being holistic. There is your relationship between mind, heart, and body, but then you are an embodied person in community. We presently, for some of us, are experiencing grief collectively, and like everything else in our lives may look absolutely identical. Like there may be nothing that actually changes, and yet the communal grief. And this can happen with times of uncertainty, transition, thinking that the future would look different for everybody. I imagine you've been experiencing some of this. What does your thought process look like here in the last couple weeks?
Yeah, collective grief is, again, why I got involved in this work. I don't want to live in a community that lacks grief literacy and that doesn't know how to have space for uncomfortable things. Where we go chaotic and off base here is that we don't recognize that our health is interwoven. We don't recognize that community is only as healthy as its unhealthiest person, and a person is only as healthy as its community. I had a conversation months ago about, well, this is why I'm concerned about the state of the world. And when I pushed with, well, how does that affect you directly? There was no clear answer. There was more theorizing on what it could be. And I said, well, have you had that experience? Do you have anecdotal? I'm not invalidating your concern. I'm asking you to validate it for yourself. What's the purpose here? What's the fear? That conversation ended on a note of, we're just not going to agree. And I thought, sure, that's completely fair. We have to recognize, again, the need to approach one another with a sense of curiosity and a sense of humility, because we are all grieving something, whether we are aware of it or not, whether we are able to articulate it, put the words to it, express it. As a somatic practitioner, one of my favorite things is to notice what the body is doing when people are talking to me and say, hey, what that right there? do you trust me for a minute? Because I know you're really angry or you're really uncomfortable or hurting or whatever it is, and I would love to support you in that. And when they say yes, we get to do a lot of weird things. And it's fantastic because that's the stuff that allows community, again, to flourish. When we can build mutual trust and mutual respect and be vulnerable with one another, we will move forward. And I had a friend yesterday who is very privileged in every aspect of his identity. And he reached out lovingly to say something along the lines of, this person is, I've cut off connection with them. And I said, that's really interesting and hard. How are you feeling? Well, I don't care. I don't care because it's not okay. And I'm not going to tolerate that. And I thought, well, division is one, reason why this is so hard. I have gotten to a point, as over the last 20 years, been accused many times of breaking off relationships or friendships with people I disagreed with. And at this point in my life, I've gotten to actually start becoming really curious and allow the other person to choose to stay in discomfort with me or to step away. And I have strong boundaries around, like, my closest people are the ones that hear all of my things. I don't have 300 friends. Like I said earlier, I have acquaintances, and I will honor the boundaries of how much access someone gets to me too. But when I'm told, or when I hear the don't break connection because of this, because of politics, because of religion, because of differing beliefs in any way, there's a couple questions that come to mind, and it's always putting it back on that person to say, oh, what about our connection do you want to preserve? What about our connection is valuable to you? I would love to hear you say that, because over here, I've got my opinions. Let's build connection right now. Do you really want to have this conversation right now? Can you attune to me? Am I in the place? Are you regulated enough? And with different language, right? Do you feel dispassionate, respectful, loving enough to honor my humanity and also hear the pain? And then just even going so far as to say, we're not breaking connection, but there is a disconnect. And the disconnect is, lay it out, right? And giving someone the opportunity to articulate how that hurts. Enneagram work does this a little bit for these types of conversations for me, but only when the other person has a functional, like a working knowledge of their Enneagram type, becoming very aware of, yes, how our Enneagram type moves through the world, but also where we might be in our own journey. Are we more collectivist and focused on that internal unity? Are we very protective of the tribe and looking at keeping our people that feel like safety as protected and privileged as possible? All of that is playing in on a subconscious level. So when I come to someone and say, this is why that belief you embody damages me, a privileged white girl, because my beloved friends are impacted directly and threatened directly by the manifestation of the beliefs that you embody. Not that I've seen you intentionally act out those thoughts and beliefs, but your support, silence, complicity, all of it embodies easy rationale for why we would say, yeah, I don't want connection with you because you don't get it. You're closed-minded. Are they? Or are they operating from the best information they have in the culture of the context they're in, with the only sense of safety that feels right and that feels secure and stable in a group where they may not belong, but at least they fit in, and that feels good enough for now because everything else is very loud and there's already 300 other things that they're grieving in their lives. We're so complex, guys. And so it just... the work has to be done. The work has to be done. The work has to be done. And when we don't encounter space where that is safe, where we can become curious and start working towards an integrative expression of who we are as people, we will be very tribal. We will be very othering. And as much as that is an uncomfortable place to occupy, I get out of client meetings and group sessions and conversations like this, and I'm like walking on cloud 9 because I am perfectly comfortable being the uncomfortable one in the room, being the one that says, you want to talk about it? Really? Let's go. Not because I have the answers, but because I have the curiosity that says, I want to know how you got here. And I want to know if that's really where you'd like to stay. If that is, I have every right to say, yeah, your boundary's a little further out from me. Rant over.
Like a big part of what we're all talking about, and part of the lesson that, like, if we don't learn how to do this, we don't have a good future as humanity. Like we're going to destroy ourselves if we don't figure out how to understand that person over there is grieving something differently than I am.
Yeah.
That person over there is scared. That's why they chose the things that they do.
Yep.
That person has their own vulnerability, and they're looking for balance, and they're looking for stability, and like all of this stuff is wrapped in. And if we don't figure out how to recognize that there's a real space that they're coming from, it's not just because they're all of the evil things that we think about.
1,000%. And that is a failure to it's a failure to launch, right? It's a failure of our cultural groups, because this is not an everybody, grief is an everybody concern, but specifically what we are talking about right now, this mentality of tribalism, this is not the work that every group needs to be doing right now at this point in American history. This is the work of the three of us, right? This is the work of the people who have access to platforms and opportunities that we can put ourselves on the line to say, on behalf of these other people groups that truly genuinely matter, I'm going to confront these mindsets in a way that doesn't further their sense of tribalism, that you're not safe, I got to get away from you, but that creates the ability to say, come closer, let's have a conversation where you can say the horribly offensive thing, and I'm going to have some mercy on you and say, okay, here's why that doesn't help anyone. This is not about you. We were watching Modern Family last night, my husband and I. We actually never watched it when it first came out. We stopped halfway through, and the other day I was like, I need some laughter. I need some belly laughs, and I've rewatched Brooklyn Nine-Nine 500 times. I need something else that's not so familiar. And we started rewatching, we're in season 5, right when Mitch and Cam are about to get married, and Mitch has a fight with his dad, Jay, who says, why can't I just be, I'm letting you be who you are. Why can't I just be who I am? This show handled everything. It's such a brilliant show. What he was really saying was, I'm uncomfortable. Stop trying to tell me what I have to do. I've come so far. He even said, I have come so far. Why can't I just still be uncomfortable here? And my thought was, you can. What will you do with it? Yeah. You are uncomfortable. What does that look like for you? Where are you going with it? Do you like where you are? Are you willing to press forward through the discomfort? Like you said about lifting weights and doing, going to the gym and doing push-ups, are you willing to fatigue the muscle now so that tomorrow it feels stronger? Or for 3 days from now, right? Yeah. Teacher's like, I will not be doing push-ups. Thank you so much. I was trying really hard to get you a gym buddy, Jeff. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. TJ actually can't do 7 push-ups. He's lying.
Oh.
Hey, I can do at least 7.
So I got $5 says you can't.
My daughter has been doing push-ups since she was little because of, like, that was our, hey, you need a timeout. It was really, no, you just need to move some energy through your body. Let's do some push-ups together. And my husband was great about doing them with her because I was always doing 100 other things. That kid is the most push-ups in her school for her class, the most push-ups in her karate class. She has muscles for days. She's like, hey, Mom, look. I'm like, beefcake. Go forward into the world. Keep doing push-ups. Because if I had done them as a kid, I could probably do more of them now.
I would love to end on this. I love your optimism of your pitch for folks saying, I would like for you to care for me in this space. For me, deep grief on the fact that the folks that I love and care for most in some of the spaces in my life, that is not simply a foreign language. It's like the tribalism is so profound that the desire for pain for the other is actually the target. Yeah. And for many of us, not only individually in our relationships, but certainly collectively, as we win, you lose, the might makes right element, we're not in this together. You guys aren't paying attention to the fact that you are to be dominated and subservient in this next era. Yeah. This is a place that, I mean, it's both grief and the defense mechanisms, I'm sure, come up in some ways. I do love the posture of being able to recognize what's going on within you, the holistic grieving that probably needs to take place for a lot of us, and re-engaging society and the relationships that we have individually, collectively, in ways where it's like, all right, well, we're going to speak into this space, I suppose, as best we can, given where we're at. And I suppose to circle all the way back, and we're not in control of the outcomes, right?
Yeah, I will speak to that too, because I think a lot about how spiritual bypassing plays in here, there are some people who are just absolutely mean. They do not give two craps about humanity. They will laugh in your face after calling you your name.
Right.
Those are not only the people that you have every right to say, like, you're mean, goodbye. You have distance from me, because you're right. I am aggressively optimistic. I have people like this in my own family. And there are days when I have to say, like, hey, here's the boundary. This is going to suck because I'm the one that has to keep putting the boundary in place. But until you recognize how your trauma is showing up. And this is part of why, like, maybe I'm optimistic because as a trauma professional, I know we're all traumatized by all kinds of things. And it shows up in gross ways. The people I know who are that angry have been thrown away the most, have not experienced a space where someone says, I think your story matters. I think you matter. Have gotten to the point where they have had to capitulate and fit into something just to feel like they can belong. And they had to kill so much of themselves along the way, right? As little kids, we are not inherently hateful, horrible people. We are learning our behaviors. Our parents and our siblings and our teachers are our first experience of the world around us and what it looks like. And so we will internalize what we learn from them, whether it is, and most of that is non-spoken. It's unspoken, nonverbal stuff that we witness, that we then assign meaning to. And our young brains don't understand what we're doing when we are creating meaning. We're just trying to function. But anyway, the people that are just outright intentionally hateful, intentionally hierarchical, intentionally harmful, are not doing it for anything other than survival. No amount of me has to go toward those people. I want to remain in my integrity no matter what. Like, I'm going to come back to everything and say, did I remain aligned with my values? Or did I go toward their values? Did I allow my values to be why I'm speaking? They're going to be hurtful. Everything they're going to say to me is going to come from a lens of, I don't give two craps if I hurt you or harm you or you never speak to me again. I think it's funny that people are mean. I think it's hilarious when people are disrespected, whatever that is. And so that to me is not a place where we have to say, oh, you deserve to come into the conversation too, if you can respect the dignity of other humans, right? And obviously right now, the cognitive dissonance that it takes to then say, I think it's funny that you're a horrible I'm a horrible person and you are mad and your feelings are hurt. The phrase cope harder cracks me up because I'm like, you are so disconnected from your own experience. Your anger is a coping tool. You don't see it. Mm-hmm.
What I hear in your language is what I would believe. It's something like, this is not a good road and you are going to crash in a big ball of fire. Yeah. The truly unfortunate thing is, like, I would normally just be, good luck to you. I'm cheering for you. I hope this comes together quickly and with as little pain as possible. The unfortunate thing is you have handcuffed yourself to me. Yeah. And I can't get out of the bond, as it were. And this becomes troublesome. Yeah. However, I guess we're to circle back to another theme that we hit, which was curiosity. Yeah. Perhaps we're going to find out what happens. I'm not exactly sure what happens when said things take place. Mandy, it's been a huge delight talking to you. Very glad that we made your acquaintance. She is Mandy Capehart, author of Restorative Grief. Again, fantastically laid out book. And grief does not need to necessarily just be about the loss of people that we love, as was said. TJ, you got anything else worth mentioning here before we close?
I feel like we could go through this whole thing beat by beat and do an analysis of this conversation because there's just so much richness. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is that the work that you have done personally to get to a more balanced place in your eightness, like that. There's so much that a lot of us can learn about what it is to set boundaries, but not set them so hard. There's so much that a lot of us can learn about what it is to create space for vulnerability without necessarily putting your broken things into a destructor's lap. Yep. Like I love the way that you talked about so much of that, and I hope that all of us can glean something from what it is to have and experience these these feelings, these emotions, this vulnerability. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, you guys. This has been amazing.
That was likewise my thought. I kept thinking, I'm going to send this to eights that I love and say, this is what it looks like to go to the high side of five
seriously.
in your experience. So our entire conversation was like, she just lives in high side 5 space here, which is for many of us, that's a tool that we desperately need.
Yeah.
Well, friends, it would mean the world to us if you would share this episode with somebody you love, preferably people who, it may be the case that you have no idea what to say to those who are grieving, but this might be a helpful place to start a conversation, to be curious and to ask questions and to be in the lives of people who are in sorrow in ways that are profound and meaningful. Mandy, where can people find you in your work?
Yeah, I'm at Mandy Capehart on all the social media platforms, although I'm not active on Twitter anymore. And I'm barely active on TikTok. So really find me on Instagram. And everything is under either Mandy Capehart, Capehart, or Restorative Grief. So if you Google either of those, you'll find my website. You'll find my podcast, Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You'll find my book. You'll find my blog. You'll find my Patreon. You'll find my private online coaching group that's hosted on Facebook. It's as simple as it can be. One name, Restorative Grief.
Wonderful. Yeah. I would affirm her Instagram is fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
TJ, you got anything else?
I got nothing, man.
He's TJ Wilson. He can officially do 7 push-ups. And I'm Jeff Cook. And who you aren't just isn't interesting.